A policewoman humiliates a black man, without knowing he was a renowned judge. It was a sweltering summer day in Paris, where the air seemed to vibrate with the crushing heat, suffocating the city that stretched between the cobblestones. The busy streets buzzed with the usual hustle and bustle, the sound of car engines gliding along the cobbled avenues, the hurried footsteps of pedestrians, the discussions on the café terraces, and this omnipresent heat, which grew a little more oppressive every minute. In the chic opera district, in the heart of luxury and beauty, the police patrolled as usual, on mission, scrutinizing every suspicious behavior. The day seemed like an ordinary scene in this neighborhood, but that day, an encounter would turn things upside down, leaving behind a bitter memory. Nadia Lemoyne, a young police officer in her early 20s, had just started her career in this sector which she thought was calm and almost idyllic. She was enthusiastic, full of this desire to serve justice with a pure heart and clear principles. The uniform fit her like a glove, and every morning, she looked in the mirror with pride, ready to defend the law, to enforce the rules. But the first weeks on the ground had left her a little disillusioned. She realized that everything was not as simple as she had imagined. Situations were rarely black and white. Human complexity cannot be reduced to a simple equation. She had this vision, inherited from her formative years, of a binary world. On one side, the righteous, and on the other, those who broke the law. And in this world, she saw herself as the guarantor of order, of peace, of the rules that had to be respected, no matter the circumstances. She didn't like crowds, noisy streets, or neighborhoods where people seemed to constantly defy authority. And even less those who, in her opinion, did not respect society's standards. These places, these people, seemed out of place, like an error that needed to be corrected. That morning the heat was unbearable. Sunlight hit the facades of buildings, creating sharp, contrasting shadows on the sidewalks. Nadia walked on the cobbled streets alongside her teammate, who was already more accustomed to the diversity of the city, more serene in the face of human heterogeneity. The patrol passed without incident, until a silhouette caught his attention. She first saw him from a distance, but something in him, in his posture, in the way he walked, made her react. A black man in his 50s, immaculate in a dark suit, his sunglasses reflecting the harsh afternoon light. He walked alone, his step measured, an almost detached gait, as if he were lost in his thoughts. His appearance contrasted with the atmosphere of the neighborhood, where he seemed out of place, as if he wasn't supposed to be there, in this prestigious place.
Excuse-me, sir, do you have a moment?
Nadia took a step forward, her tone a little more authoritative than she had intended, her voice piercing the warm air of the street. It was a reflex, as if she knew in advance that what she was going to say was a simple formality, a control necessary to maintain order. The man, who seemed to be deep in thought, slowly turned his head towards her. He raised his sunglasses for a moment, as if to better understand the situation. His gaze was calm, but a glint of astonishment in his eyes betrayed his disbelief at the interruption. "Yes, of course, but can I know what's going on?"
I've been watching you.
"You seem to be heading somewhere you're not supposed to go," Nadia replied, her gaze taking in every detail of the man's impeccable attire, his measured gestures. His eyes lingered on his polished leather shoes, on the perfectly tailored cut of his suit, on the quality of his sunglasses, and in his mind, these clues formed a flawless equation. A man like this, in this neighborhood, could only be suspicious. In an instant, she imagined another reality, a reality where this man, despite his impeccable appearance, was an imposter, a delinquent slipping through the cracks of society. She had no proof, no concrete reason, but a visceral intuition, fueled by buried prejudices, dictated this conclusion to her. He was not a man who belonged to his world. He must have been one of those who sought to circumvent the law. The man looked at her calmly, almost as if he expected this kind of encounter. His eyes, at first indifferent, briefly lit up with a mischievous shine. He wasn't fooled by the policewoman's attitude, but he also knew that he had nothing to prove to her. "I assure you I have nothing to do with anything wrong here," he replied in a quiet, almost too calm voice. He shook his head slightly, as if the situation was completely absurd. But this nonchalance had no effect on Nadia. She suddenly felt more authoritative, more determined in her role. It had to be a fake, that was obvious. In a cold tone, she replied, "I will have to verify your identity." She thought the situation was under control, that this procedure was simply a formality. But with each passing second the man seemed less embarrassed, less afraid, which irritated her more. Her hands, although firm on the baton, were almost trembling with suppressed anger, fueled by the evidence of a humiliation she could not admit. A stranger did not have to impose this calm look on her, this confidence which called into question the order she thought she embodied. "I have nothing to hide from you, but I'm in a hurry," he said, without raising his voice, as if the situation had no importance to him. His words, his gestures, were so serene that they disturbed Nadia.
De estrés Rose Whittinger.
"It's procedure," she replied, but inside she knew it was all an attempt to maintain control, to show that she was in charge. She pulled out her phone, her finger sliding across the screen to call her superiors. Just hearing the tone in her ear reassured her that she was doing the right thing. She was a police officer enforcing the law, and there was no room for doubt. "You're not even in our database," she said with a certain arrogance. The absence of any mention in the system seemed to her to be absolute proof of her bad behavior. On the other hand, it's a bit suspicious that a man of your stature would hang around here for no reason. She felt reassured by his words, convinced that the man in front of her must have a plausible explanation, but that he would, like others before him, seek to dodge it. And this justification would probably come a long time. She was sure of it. The man stared at her, a glint of mischief once again crossing his eyes. He knew this meeting was more than just a routine checkup. It was a clash between two worlds, between two conceptions of justice, between the truth and the image that Nadia had of it. "I am Judge Marc Leroux, President of the Paris Court of Appeal," he said in a calm voice, almost a whisper. A name that carried weight, but that Nadia, in her head saturated with certainties, was not immediately able to understand.
She burst out laughing, a nervous laugh, almost disdainful.
"A judge, really? You?
A man like you?
You are far too untrustworthy to be a judge." She looked down at him, her mind still playing the pieces of the puzzle, looking for flaws, clues. She couldn't believe that a man of his stature could be a judge. His brain, blocked by deep-seated prejudices, refused to admit the truth. In his mind, a judge was someone powerful, respected, but not a man of color, much less a man who seemed to be so calm, almost too calm in such a situation. The man's gaze became more piercing, more intense. He understood that, even if Nadia did not see it, certain prejudices are stubborn and take root in unsuspected corners. But he wasn't angry. He did not want to prove his status to a police officer who was not ready to accept it. "Maybe you underestimate me," he said, his tone calm but laden with a hint of defiance. But this sentence, far from making her doubt, seemed to reinforce Nadia's certainty that he was guilty of something. Without even taking the time to think about her actions, Nadia decided, in a burst of zeal and vanity, to put him in his place, not to be intimidated by the man's words. "I'll take you to the station," she said firmly, her voice growing harsher. She pretended to take out her handcuffs, a mechanical gesture, which she believed to be justified, although the man made no move to prevent her. He didn't move, he looked at her, still calm, like a mirror reflecting his inability to see beyond his own vision. It was at this precise moment that one of his colleagues, observing the scene from afar, came running. He had seen Nadia's actions, seen the way she stood firmly in front of the man, and her furtive glance at her phone as if he were going to call for detention proceedings. Something was wrong. He recognized the man, a man he never thought he would see in such a situation. He rushed towards them, his steps quick, hurried by the urgency of the situation. "Nadia, stop immediately," he shouted, his voice louder than ever.
"It's Judge Marc Leroux. You can do that."
Nadia stopped abruptly, a shiver running through her body as if everything around her had just stopped. His heart pounded harder in his chest, adrenaline mixing with a growing unease. She turned to her colleague, an incredulous and slightly ashamed look on her face. "The judge," she repeated, her voice trembling with incomprehension. She suddenly felt small, trapped by the enormity of her own mistake. A cold sweat ran down her back, and the idea of her mistake gripped her, but she felt paralyzed, pride still holding her back. Accepting that she was wrong was too much to ask for a peace officer proud of her position. She scrutinized the man in front of her, trying to put together the pieces of a reality she did not want to accept. The colleague, still panting, hastened to explain the situation to him in a serious tone. Marc Leroux is one of the most respected judges in this country. He has sat in cases of corruption, abuse of power, and you arrested him like a common delinquent. His face was marked with disbelief and disappointment. The injustice that emerged from the situation struck him as much as the shock that went through Nadia. He brought down politicians, businessmen. He dealt with cases of police violence.
How cold you.
Nadia turned pale at these words. She realized, too late, that the man in front of her was not simply someone she had misjudged. She had just made a colossal mistake, not only personal, but also professional. The idea of her own ignorance hit her harder than anything. I thought, she stammered, but the words escaped her. They were stuck in his throat, crushed by the magnitude of the situation. She couldn't think of anything else to say, except a trembling breath that betrayed her unease. Marc Leroux, for his part, remained perfectly calm, his gaze as penetrating as ever, but with a certain distance which made it almost inaccessible. Impressively calm, he slowly turned towards her, his gaze not leaving Nadia for a second. I'm going to give you a chance, Nadia, to think about how you treat others, he said, his voice firm, but strangely measured. But I will also ensure that you are held accountable for this abuse of power. The coldness of his words made Nadia shiver. She never imagined that her career could be called into question by a simple encounter, a simple error of judgment. The humiliation hit her with unexpected brutality. She had spent her whole life defending justice, convincing herself that she embodied order, and now she was the one at fault. Humility was essential, but at what cost? The next day, the story quickly went around the police station. The murmurs spread like wildfire. Nadia's colleagues began to ask each other questions, to exchange embarrassed glances. Nadia felt like a figure of ridicule in this microcosm of the law, caught between the anger of her superiors and the embarrassment of having underestimated a man because of his prejudices. She knew she had just made a monumental error in judgment, one that would follow her much longer than she could have imagined. A name isn't everything, she repeated to herself, but the thought only deepened the pain of her mistake. It wasn't just one man's mistake. It was a questioning of his ability to perceive people without being dominated by his own preconceptions. She would have to learn the hard way that a lesson in humility could come from the highest peak, and that she was not ready to forget it. Marc Leroux, for his part, had not sought revenge. His approach had been absolute class, a mixture of firmness and patience. He had chosen to remind Nadia of the importance of fairness and justice, but also the importance of knowing how to recognize one's mistakes. Judges, like the police, are supposed to serve the people, not impose hasty judgments, he told her later, in a private interview she would never forget. These words echoed in his mind, a stark reminder that a good judge was not there to judge people by their appearance, but to administer justice with discernment, compassion, and fairness. As for Nadia, she never looked at a man by his appearance again. Every detail, every act of indignation she had felt towards him before, had turned into a lesson in humility that she could never erase. She knew that this meeting marked the start of a new stage in her career, but also in her life. Because it was not just the mistake of a peace officer, it was the error of a woman who believed that her certainties would protect her from human reality. But this lesson, as painful as it was, would make her stronger, more open to the complexity of the world around her. And she wasn't ready to forget it.